We often talk about vitamin C, zinc, elderberry, turmeric shots, all the flashy immune boosters. But what about protein? Could low protein quietly weaken your immune defenses? Let's break it down. Your immune system isn't magic. It's built from physical structures, cells, signaling molecules, enzymes, and most importantly, antibodies. And what are antibodies made of? Protein. White blood cells? Protein-rich structures. Cytokines that coordinate immune responses. Proteins. Even the receptors that recognize invading pathogens are made from amino acids, the building blocks of protein. In other words, protein isn't just a macronutrient for muscles. It's structural material for your immune army. When dietary protein intake drops too low, the body prioritizes survival. It diverts amino acids to vital organs like the heart and brain. Muscle tissue becomes a reserve tank. But here's the catch. Immune cells are rapidly dividing cells. They require a steady supply of amino acids to multiply and respond to threats. Without enough raw material, immune cell production slows. Studies on protein energy malnutrition show striking immune impairment, reduced T cell function, lower antibody production, shrinking thymus gland, increased susceptibility to infections. In severe cases, the body literally loses the ability to mount an adequate immune response. Now, before you panic, this level of deficiency is most common in severe undernutrition. But what about milder, chronic low intake, especially in older adults? As we age, protein absorption becomes less efficient. Appetite may decline. Muscle mass drops, a condition known as sarcopenia. But muscle isn't just for movement. It's a reservoir of amino acids that can be mobilized during infection. Lower muscle mass means fewer reserves when illness strikes. Research shows that hospitalized older adults with low protein intake experience longer recovery times, higher infection rates, and slower wound healing. Why? Because wound repair requires collagen synthesis. Collagen is protein. Antibody generation. Protein. Acute phase response. Protein dependent. Even something as basic as maintaining the integrity of your gut barrier depends on adequate protein intake. Your intestinal lining renews itself every few days. That regeneration requires amino acids. If the barrier weakens, pathogens and inflammatory molecules may leak into circulation, increasing systemic inflammation. And chronic inflammation itself can further impair immune regulation. But here's where nuance matters. More protein is not automatically better. Extremely high animal protein diets may stimulate inflammatory pathways, such as IGF-1 signaling, that have been associated with increased risk of certain chronic diseases. The goal is adequacy, not excess. So how much is enough? The recommended dietary allowance for adults is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. For a 70-kilogram adult, about 154 pounds, that's roughly 56 grams per day. However, emerging research suggests that older adults may benefit from slightly higher intake, around 1.0 to 1.2 grams per kilogram, to preserve muscle and immune resilience. But it's not just quantity. Quality and distribution matter. Plant-based protein sources, beans, lentils, chickpeas, tofu, tempeh, quinoa, nuts, seeds, provide not only amino acids but also fiber, phytonutrients, and anti-inflammatory compounds. Diets centered on whole plant foods have been associated with improved immune regulation and lower inflammation markers. Take legumes, for example. They provide lysine, an essential amino acid often limited in grains. Pair beans with whole grains like lentils and brown rice, and you create a complementary amino acid profile. The body doesn't require complete proteins. At every meal, it pools amino acids throughout the day. Variety ensures adequacy. Another factor often overlooked is calorie intake. Even if protein percentage seems adequate, insufficient total calories can push the body into protein conservation mode, diverting amino acids for energy rather than immune construction. So low protein can weaken immunity, but low calorie intake can amplify the effect. What does mild protein inadequacy look like clinically? Frequent infections, slow wound healing, hair thinning, muscle loss, fatigue, edema, and severe cases. But often the signs are subtle, just increased vulnerability. And what about specific immune components? T lymphocytes, the coordinators of adaptive immunity, are particularly sensitive to protein deficiency. Studies show reduced proliferation and impaired signaling when amino acid supply is limited. B cells, responsible for antibody production, also decline in function. Natural killer cell activity may drop. Even the complement system, part of innate immunity, relies on protein-based enzymes circulating in blood. It's a cascading effect. But remember, protein doesn't act alone. Zinc deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, vitamin D insufficiency, and iron deficiency can also compromise immunity. And many of these deficiencies can coexist in poorly planned diets, whether omnivorous or plant-based. The solution is not fear, it's balance. Whole food, plant, predominant diets can meet protein needs comfortably when calories are sufficient and food variety is emphasized. 1 cup of cooked lentils contains about 18 grams of protein. A block of firm tofu, around 40 grams. A cup of chickpeas, roughly 14 grams. Sprinkle seeds, add nuts, include whole grains, and reaching 60-80 grams per day becomes entirely achievable. Distribution across meals also appears beneficial. Instead of concentrating protein at dinner, spreading intake across breakfast, lunch, and dinner may better stimulate muscle protein synthesis, particularly important in older adults. And what about illness itself? During infection, protein requirements increase. Fever raises metabolic rate. Immune activation accelerates amino acid turnover. The body breaks down muscle tissue to supply glutamine, a key fuel for immune cells. This is why prolonged illness can lead to muscle wasting. Adequate dietary protein during recovery becomes crucial to rebuild both muscle and immune capacity. However, supplementation should be individualized. Excessive isolated protein powders without medical need may not confer additional benefit. And whole food sources provide nutrients that powders lack. Let's address a common misconception. Some argue that since antibodies are proteins, loading up on protein will supercharge immunity. But immune efficiency depends on regulation, not just raw material. Overnutrition and obesity are also associated with immune dysfunction. Chronic low-grade inflammation can impair immune signaling and increase susceptibility to severe infections. Balance is everything. Undernutrition weakens defense. Overnutrition disrupts regulation. Adequacy supports resilience. Another consideration is gut microbiome health. High-fiber plant proteins nourish beneficial gut bacteria. These microbes produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which help regulate immune responses and reduce inflammation. In contrast, excessive intake of processed meats has been associated with pro-inflammatory changes in the gut environment. So protein source influences immune tone, not just immune quantity. We also need to consider global context. In many parts of the world, protein energy malnutrition remains a major driver of infectious disease vulnerability. Children with inadequate protein intake experience stunted growth and impaired vaccine responses. Restoring adequate nutrition improves immune competence. In more affluent regions, the issue is often different elderly individuals eating too little overall, relying on refined carbohydrates with minimal legumes or protein-dense foods. Here, subtle protein insufficiency can quietly contribute to frailty. So what practical steps can strengthen immune resilience through adequate protein? First, include a protein source at each meal. Oatmeal topped with peanut butter and seeds. Lentil soup for lunch. Stir-fried tofu with vegetables and quinoa for dinner. Second, monitor total intake, especially if appetite is low. Smoothies blended with soy milk and nut butter can help increase protein density without excessive volume. Third, maintain resistance exercise. Muscle contraction signals the body to utilize dietary protein effectively. Without mechanical stimulus, even adequate intake may not preserve muscle mass optimally. Fourth, ensure overall nutritional adequacy, including B12 for those on plant-based diets, vitamin D if levels are low, and sufficient zinc from whole foods like beans, seeds, and whole grains. And finally, avoid extremes. Neither protein deficiency nor protein obsession serves long-term health. The immune system is dynamic. It requires building blocks, energy, and regulatory balance. Protein provides structure. Phytonutrients provide modulation. Fiber supports microbiome harmony. Micronutrients fine-tune signaling. So can low protein weaken your immune system? Yes. When intake falls below physiological needs, immune cell production, antibody synthesis, and recovery capacity can all decline. But the answer isn't steak at every meal. It's adequacy, variety, and whole food balance. Your immune system doesn't need a miracle supplement. It needs consistent nourishment. Every cell you deploy against infection is built from what you eat. The question is not whether protein matters. It's whether you're getting enough from sources that support not just immune strength, but overall health. Because at the end of the day, Immunity isn't about boosting. It's about supporting the intricate biology that's already working tirelessly on your behalf, quietly, continuously, and profoundly dependent on the nutrients you provide, and that includes protein. Your immune system is not an abstract force. It is a living network of cells and signaling molecules constructed from physical building blocks. And those building blocks are amino acids derived from the protein you eat. Antibodies, for example, are highly specialized proteins designed to recognize and bind to specific pathogens. Each antibody is assembled from long chains of amino acids folded into precise shapes. Without adequate protein intake, your body may struggle to manufacture these complex defensive molecules in sufficient quantities. T cells, which coordinate and execute targeted immune attacks, also depend on protein availability. When a virus or bacteria invades, T cells must rapidly multiply, a process that requires large amounts of amino acids to create new cellular structures, receptors, and enzymes. If protein intake is inadequate, this rapid expansion can be blunted, slowing the body's response time. Cytokines, the chemical messengers that allow immune cells to communicate, are themselves small proteins. They signal when to activate inflammation, when to increase antibody production, and when to shut the response down. Even a subtle shortage of amino acids can interfere with this finely tuned communication network. Immune enzymes, including those involved in destroying pathogens, are also protein-based. These enzymes break down bacterial cell walls, neutralize viruses, and help clear infected cells. Their production depends directly on amino acid availability. In short, protein is not just about muscle, it is structural material for immune defense. Without enough dietary protein, the body may prioritize essential organs over immune expansion, leaving your defenses less prepared to respond quickly and effectively when challenged. Protein deficiency doesn't just affect muscle size or physical strength, it directly impacts the production and performance of your immune cells. White blood cells, which serve as the frontline defenders against infections, are constantly being produced in the bone marrow. This process requires a steady supply of amino acids to build new cells. When dietary protein intake is too low, the body may reduce white blood cell production, leaving fewer defenders circulating in the bloodstream. T cells, a critical subset of white blood cells, are particularly sensitive to protein availability. These cells are responsible for identifying infected cells, coordinating immune responses, and destroying pathogens. In a protein-deficient state, T cells may not multiply effectively when activated. Their signaling capacity can weaken, and their ability to eliminate infected cells may decline. This means the immune system may recognize a threat, but respond more slowly and less aggressively. Antibody production also suffers. B cells require adequate amino acids to produce immunoglobulins, the specialized proteins that bind to viruses and bacteria. When protein intake is insufficient, antibody levels may drop, reducing the body's ability to neutralize pathogens efficiently. This can lead to infections that last longer or recur more frequently. In practical terms, protein deficiency may manifest as increased susceptibility to colds, slower wound healing, prolonged recovery from illness, and greater vulnerability to complications. During infection, the body's protein needs actually increase due to higher metabolic demand. If intake doesn't meet that demand, muscle tissue may be broken down to compensate, further weakening overall resilience. Adequate protein is therefore not a luxury for immunity. It is a fundamental requirement for maintaining strong, responsive, and coordinated immune defense. Skeletal muscle is more than a tissue for movement, it functions as a critical metabolic reserve. During times of stress, injury, or infection, the body's demand for amino acids rises sharply. Immune cells multiply rapidly, inflammatory proteins are produced, and damaged tissues must be repaired. When dietary intake cannot immediately meet these increased needs, the body turns to its internal reservoir, muscle. Muscle tissue stores large amounts of amino acids in the form of contractile proteins. During illness, the body breaks down a portion of this tissue to release amino acids such as glutamine and alanine, which are essential fuels for immune cells and for maintaining blood glucose levels. This temporary sacrifice helps sustain immune activity. However, if protein intake is chronically low, muscle mass gradually declines even before illness strikes. That means the reserve tank is already half empty. With smaller reserves, The body has less capacity to respond to infection without significant muscle wasting. Recovery becomes slower because rebuilding both immune proteins and lost muscle requires additional amino acids that may not be available in sufficient amounts. This cycle can lead to prolonged weakness and delayed healing. Older adults are particularly vulnerable. Aging naturally reduces muscle mass, a process known as sarcopenia, and appetite often declines as well. At the same time, the body becomes less efficient at using dietary protein to stimulate muscle repair, a phenomenon sometimes called anabolic resistance. When illness occurs, these individuals may experience rapid muscle breakdown and a slower immune response. Maintaining adequate protein intake, combined with resistance activity when possible, helps preserve muscle stores, ensuring the body has the amino acid reserves needed to mount an effective defense and recover more efficiently from infection. Your intestinal lining is one of the most dynamic tissues in the human body. The cells that form this protective barrier turn over rapidly, roughly every 3 to 5 days. This constant renewal requires a steady supply of amino acids to build new structural proteins, enzymes, and transporters. Without adequate dietary protein, the regeneration process can slow, weakening the integrity of this crucial defense layer. The gut lining serves as a selective barrier. It allows nutrients to pass into the bloodstream while blocking harmful bacteria, toxins, and undigested particles. The tight junctions that seal intestinal cells together are made of specialized proteins. When protein intake is insufficient, the production and maintenance of these junctions may decline. As a result, the barrier can become more permeable, sometimes referred to as increased intestinal permeability. When the barrier weakens, microbial fragments such as lipopolysaccharides may cross into circulation. This can trigger low-grade systemic inflammation as the immune system reacts to substances that would normally remain confined within the gut. Chronic inflammation not only stresses immune regulation, but may also divert resources away from effective pathogen defense. Additionally, immune cells embedded in the gut-associated lymphoid tissue rely on amino acids to produce antibodies like immunoglobulin A, which plays a key role in neutralizing pathogens before they enter the body. Reduced protein availability may impair this first line of immune surveillance. The gut microbiome also interacts closely with the intestinal barrier. Adequate protein, particularly from whole food sources, supports balanced microbial activity, while severe deficiency can disrupt this ecosystem. In essence, sufficient protein helps maintain both the physical wall of the intestine and the immune defenses stationed there, reducing vulnerability to infection and excessive inflammation. Protein adequacy is about meeting physiological needs, not dramatically exceeding them. For most adults, intake around 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day meets basic requirements, while many experts suggest that older adults may benefit from closer to 1.2 grams per kilogram to maintain muscle mass and immune strength. This range appears sufficient to support antibody production, immune cell turnover, tissue repair, and recovery during illness without promoting unnecessary excess. As we age, the body becomes less efficient at stimulating muscle protein synthesis from smaller protein doses, a phenomenon often called anabolic resistance. This means older adults may require slightly higher intake, distributed evenly across meals, to maintain lean tissue and preserve amino acid reserves that can be mobilized during stress or infection. Importantly, protein quality does not require heavy reliance on animal products. Whole plant foods such as beans, lentils, chickpeas, tofu, tempeh, nuts, and seeds provide ample amino acids when consumed in sufficient variety and total calories. Legumes, for example, are rich in lysine, while whole grains provide methionine. Together, they complement each other naturally over the course of a day. Beyond protein itself, these plant sources deliver fiber, antioxidants, polyphenols, and unsaturated fats that help regulate inflammation and support gut microbiome health. Chronic inflammation can impair immune balance, so combining adequate protein with anti-inflammatory nutrients may offer synergistic benefits. Rather than focusing on isolated protein powders or extreme high-protein regimens, emphasizing diverse, minimally processed whole foods ensures that protein intake supports not just immune resilience, but overall metabolic health. Adequacy, balance, and variety remain the foundation of a diet that strengthens the body's natural defense systems.